I stood in the lawyer's office watching Derek lean back in his leather chair, fingers laced behind his head like a man who'd already won the lottery. The will hadn't been opened yet, but his confidence filled the room like expensive cologne. He caught my eye and smiled. That same smooth smile he'd worn the day he told me my mother's estate planning was adult business and I should focus on my own life. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I knew was coming. Derek thought the story was already over. He thought I'd lost before we even began. What he didn't know was that I'd been paying attention for 3 long years. Derek shifted his chair closer to mine, invading my space in that casual way he always did. His shoulder brushed against mine as he leaned in, voice dropping to that practiced whisper he used when he wanted to sound concerned. "Lily, I know this is hard for you," he said, his breath warm against my ear. "But your mother made her choices. Sometimes we have to accept that family doesn't always mean what we think it means." The words landed like small stones. He was telling me I wasn't family anymore. Not in the way that mattered. Not in the way that came with inheritance rights. I thought about Mom during those final months. How she'd become so quiet, choosing every word like she was walking through a minefield. We'd sit in her garden, and she'd pause mid-sentence, her eyes distant, as if she was calculating something I couldn't see. I'd ask if she was okay, and she'd just squeeze my hand and say, "I'm making sure things are right, sweetheart." At the time, I thought she meant her health. Now I understood she was planning something much bigger. She was building a trap, piece by piece, while Derek thought he was the only one playing chess. I remembered the first week after their wedding. I'd driven to her house, the house where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to ride my bike in the driveway, and my key didn't work anymore. I stood there, twisting it in the lock, confused, until Derek opened the door from the inside. "Oh, we changed the locks," he said casually, like he was mentioning a new brand of coffee. "Security upgrade. I'll get you a new key." He never did. That was the first door he closed. Within a month, I needed permission to visit my own mother. The erasure happened slowly, so slowly that I didn't recognize it until I was already invisible. Thanksgiving dinner got moved to a time I couldn't make because of work. Christmas became just the 2 of us, before I even knew it was a discussion. Mom's birthday party happened without me finding out until I saw photos on social media. Each time, Derek had a reasonable explanation. Each time, Mom apologized quietly but never corrected it. And each time, I lost a little more space in her life. No one defended me. No one even seemed to notice I was disappearing. In public, Derek was perfect. I watched him guide Mom through restaurants with a gentle hand on her back, laughing at her jokes, calling her my beautiful bride with that warm smile that made strangers sigh. At charity events, he'd stand beside her, proud and attentive, the devoted husband everyone admired. People would tell me how lucky Mom was to have found love again after Dad died. They'd say Derek treated her like a queen. What they didn't see were the closed-door conversations about money, the way he redirected every decision, the slowly tightening control disguised as care. I was visiting one afternoon when I heard Derek on his phone in the study. The door was cracked open, and his voice carried down the hallway where I'd stopped to look at old family photos. "The assets are mostly liquid," he was saying. "Once everything transfers, we can consolidate the accounts." There was a pause. "She's stubborn about the house, but I'm working on it." My stomach dropped. Mom was standing 20 feet away in the kitchen, very much alive, and he was already planning what to do with her money. I pulled out my phone and started taking notes. That was the day everything changed for me. When I asked Mom about estate planning, Derek answered before she could open her mouth. "It's all handled, Lily," he said smoothly, that patient smile spreading across his face. "Your mother and I worked with an attorney months ago. Everything's organized and fair." I looked at Mom, waiting for her to confirm it, but she just stared at her tea. "You don't need to worry about these details," Derek continued. "It's morbid, really, to discuss this while your mother is healthy and happy." But his insistence that I shouldn't ask questions told me everything. He didn't want me near those documents for a reason. Mom was in the hospital for a routine procedure, nothing serious, but I'd driven 3 hours to be there. Derek had stepped out to take a call, and Mom grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Her eyes were sharp, more focused than they'd been in months. "The blue folder," she whispered. "In my closet. Behind the winter coats." I started to ask what she meant, but Derek's voice echoed down the hallway, and Mom's expression went blank again. She patted my hand and closed her eyes. I didn't understand it then. The blue folder. It sounded like nothing. It would turn out to be everything. Mom's funeral was theatrical. Derek cried loudly at the service, his shoulders shaking, accepting condolences like a man shattered by loss. He gave a moving eulogy about their love story, about how she'd saved him from loneliness. People hugged him and whispered about his devotion. I stood in the back row, dry-eyed and silent, holding everything inside like a clenched fist. Later, people told me I seemed cold. They said grief affects everyone differently, but maybe I should have shown more emotion. They had no idea what I was holding in. They didn't know I was standing on top of a volcano. A week after the funeral, I used the spare key I'd kept from childhood, the one Derek didn't know about, and let myself into Mom's house while he was out. My hands shook as I opened her closet and pushed past the winter coats. The blue folder was there, tucked into an old shoebox. Inside were documents dated from 6 months before she died, bank statements showing transfers I'd never known about, letters to a different attorney, not the one Derek mentioned, and a handwritten note in Mom's careful script. "When you find this, you'll understand." I saw him clearly at the end. Finish what I started. The attorney's name was Elizabeth Brennan, and her office was 40 miles away in a town Derek never visited. When I called and mentioned my mother's name, there was a pause. "I was hoping you'd reach out," she said quietly. "Your mother was very specific about timing." We met 2 days later, and Elizabeth slid a document across her desk. It was a new will, executed 4 months before Mom died, with 2 witnesses and a notary seal. "Your mother replaced her previous estate plan," Elizabeth explained, "and she made very sure your stepfather wouldn't know about it until it was too late." Derek started calling me emotional to our family friends. I heard it through the grapevine. Lily's having a hard time accepting her mother's choices. Lily's confused about the estate. Lily's not thinking clearly. He painted me as unstable, as someone whose grief had made her irrational. And I let him. Every time someone repeated his words back to me with concern in their voice, I just nodded sadly and said I was working through it. I never corrected the narrative. I wanted Derek to believe I was falling apart. I wanted him to think I was too broken to be a threat. Elizabeth showed me the clause buried in the new will. Section 7, subsection C. My hands trembled as I read it. The inheritance came with conditions, specific actions Derek needed to have completed during the marriage. Proof of genuine care. Documentation of shared decision-making. Evidence that he'd supported Mom's relationship with her family. Each requirement was measurable, specific, and impossible to fake. And from what I knew, Derek had failed every single one. "Your mother was brilliant," Elizabeth said softly. "She built a test he couldn't pass because she already knew who he really was." Weeks crawled by. Derek grew restless, making comments about needing to finalize everything, and asking when the estate would be settled. I stayed quiet, letting him interpret my silence as defeat. He started making plans out loud, selling the house, maybe traveling, investing in a business opportunity. Each time he talked about Mom's money like it was already his, I felt something harden inside me. His impatience was showing. His mask was slipping. And I just watched, taking mental notes, letting him hang himself with his own words. Derek's confidence became reckless. He told neighbors he was planning renovations on Mom's house. He mentioned to her bridge club that he might sell it and buy something smaller since it's too big for one person. He was spending money in his head before a single dollar had legally transferred. He'd even contacted a realtor. I found out from a family friend who thought it was odd he was moving so quickly. That assumption, that absolute certainty that everything was his, would cost him more than he could imagine. But he couldn't see it. He was too busy counting money that didn't belong to him. The text came on a Tuesday morning. "Will reading scheduled for Thursday, 2 p.m., Elizabeth Brennan's office. See you there." Derek's message was casual, almost friendly, like he was inviting me to coffee. There was no anxiety in those words, no hesitation. He thought he was inviting me to watch my own defeat, to witness him claim everything Mom had built. I read the message 3 times, then set my phone down without responding. I didn't correct him. I didn't warn him. I just let him walk toward Thursday with that same confident smile, completely unaware of what was waiting. Now I was back in the present moment, sitting in Elizabeth's office, watching Derek's smile widen as she opened the folder. The room smelled like old books and furniture polish. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the desk. Derek had dressed up for this. Pressed shirt, expensive watch, the outfit of a man attending his own coronation. Elizabeth cleared her throat and began reading. Her voice was steady, professional, completely neutral. But I saw her eyes flick toward Derek once, just for a second, and something that looked almost like pity crossed her face. Elizabeth read the opening allocations. To my beloved husband Derek, I leave my gratitude for the companionship he provided. Derek's smile held steady, but I saw a tiny muscle in his jaw twitch. That was it. Gratitude. Not the house, not the investments, not the bank accounts. Elizabeth continued reading, and with each sentence I watched Derek's face change. His smile didn't drop all at once. It fractured in stages, like ice cracking under weight. First confusion, then disbelief, then something darker. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles whitening. There must be a mistake, he said, voice strained. Then came the conditions. Elizabeth's voice remained calm as she read Section 7. The inheritance required documented proof that Derek had maintained Mom's family relationships, supported her independence, and made financial decisions jointly. Each requirement included specific examples and evidence needed. Medical records showing he'd attended appointments. Bank statements showing shared account access. Written documentation of family events where I'd been included. The list was surgical, precise, impossible to fake. Derek had no proof because he'd done none of those things. He'd isolated her, controlled her, and erased me. And Mom had documented all of it. And to my daughter Lily, Elizabeth read, and my heart hammered so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I leave my home, my investments, my personal belongings, and the entirety of my estate, with the hope that she will understand why I made the choices I did in these final months. My name hung in the air like a bell that had been rung. The room went completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and Derek's sharp breathing beside me. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just sat there, letting the words sink in, feeling the weight of my mother's final gift. Elizabeth turned another page, and her voice softened slightly. I wish to explain this distribution clearly. During my marriage to Derek, I discovered that his affection was conditional upon financial benefit. He isolated me from my daughter, controlled my decisions, and began planning for my assets before I was gone. I made this will with a clear mind and full understanding. Lily is my heir because she loved me without conditions, and because I trust her to use these resources with the integrity Derek never possessed. Mom's words were like a courtroom testimony. She'd named his behavior without rage, just cold, clear observation. Derek exploded out of his chair. This is insane. That will isn't valid. His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through the anger. Elizabeth didn't even blink. The will was properly executed with witnesses, filed appropriately, and supersedes all previous estate documents. It is legally binding. Derek spun toward me, his face red, that smooth mask completely shattered. You did this. You manipulated her. She wasn't in her right mind. His voice was shaking now, all pretense of the concerned husband gone. I just looked at him, steady and calm, saying nothing. There was nothing I needed to say. Mom had said it all. I stood slowly, gathering my purse, my movements deliberate and unhurried. Derek was still sputtering, threatening lawyers, throwing words like contest and fraud into the air like they meant something. Elizabeth simply handed him a business card. You're welcome to consult your own attorney. Burritt, she said coolly. But I assure you, this will is airtight. I walked toward the door, my footsteps steady on the hardwood floor. Behind me, Derek called my name, his voice cracking with panic. Lily, wait, we can talk about this. We can work something out. I reached for the door handle without looking back. There was nothing to work out. I never responded to Derek's calls or messages. Within 3 months, he'd moved out of Mom's house, my house now, and disappeared from town. I heard through mutual friends that he'd tried dating again, targeting another lonely widow, but word had gotten around about what happened. People remembered. I sold Derek's belongings at a yard sale and donated the money to a local charity for domestic abuse survivors. I kept Mom's garden exactly as she'd left it, spending Saturday mornings there with my coffee, feeling her presence in the roses she'd planted. Derek had thought he'd won the moment he married her, but my mother had seen him clearly at the end, and she'd made sure that the person who loved her truly was the one who'd inherit everything. Not the money, but the truth of who she was. He thought he'd won, but my mother made sure he never could.